I first became aware of you because my mother saw you doing a TED Talk a long time ago. And I know, right? So random. And when you told the story about your grandmother saying to you that you were special and you could do anything you wanted to do, that resonated with her because she remembered when I was younger, a counselor said that to her about me.
Oh,
So for that, and in addition to your work with incarcerated people, she felt like I should pay attention to you and your work. So I did, and I do.
oh, thank you. That's great. And your mom sounds great. She's wonderful.
I saw Just Mercy at the Toronto International Film Festival. I felt like it was a very inspirational film because it encourages people to look beyond the crime and see the men or the women accused. And yes, some of them have committed some heinous crimes, and maybe these individuals are people that have served our country or suffer from PTSD, but maybe they have some mental issues or require some medical attention, but not death row. I felt like every human being on this earth is a daughter, a son, a mother, a father who deserves to be treated with empathy or simply just mercy. I saw a quote that you wrote, or not wrote, or something that you said specifically about this. So you said, after presenting the data and making my arguments about the unconstitutional exclusion of African Americans, the judge complained loudly, quote, I'm going to grant your motion, Mr. Stevenson, but I'll be honest, I'm pretty fed up with people always talking about minority rights, African Americans, etc. When is someone going to come to my courtroom and protect the rights of Confederate Americans, end quote. And so I feel like this seems to be an ongoing thematic trend in America at the moment. Why do you think this ideology is so popular, and what can people of color who are not in the legal system, just plain old people like myself, what can we do to turn it around?
Well, first of all, thank you for seeing the film. And I really wanted to make sure in the movie as well as in the book that I told the stories of people who were not just factually innocent, because everybody deserves justice. And we have a lot of people who have been properly convicted but unfairly sentenced. And I do believe that each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. I think that if somebody tells a lie, they're not just a liar. And if somebody takes something, they're not just a thief. I think even if you kill somebody, you're not just a killer. And we have to know the other things you are before we judge you. And in our system, that doesn't happen a lot, and that creates unfairness. And I really wanted that to be communicated. And for people of color, it is especially problematic because of this long history of racial inequality. And I think that sentiment expressed by the judge you cite and this problem that we are currently facing is a function of, I think, our long history of silence about what we have done to sustain racial inequality and racial injustice. I don't think we're truly free yet. I think we're burdened by this history of racial injustice. I think it's created a kind of smog in the air. In many parts of this country, we have affirmed that history. We have celebrated it. We've romanticized it. We have not been honest. In that respect, I do think we have to engage in narrative work, and that's partly what we're trying to do with our new museum and our new memorial. It's partly why I wrote this book. But there are things that we have not talked about in this country. I think we haven't talked about the native genocide, what happened to native people. When Europeans came to this continent, was it genocide? We killed millions of native people through famine and war and disease. We kept their lands and their words, but we made the people leave. And we haven't acknowledged that. And we justified that violence by saying that native people, well, all those native people, they're savages. We created this rhetoric shaped on race. And before we had a constitution, we had an ideology of narrative of white supremacy, a narrative of racial difference. And that ideology is what got us comfortable with 2.5 centuries of slavery. And I think the great evil of American slavery wasn't involuntary servitude or forced labor. I think it was the narrative we created to justify enslavement. We said that black people aren't fully human. Black people can't do this. Black people can't do that. That ideology was the true evil. And if you look at the 13th Amendment, it talks about ending involuntary servitude and ending forced labor, but it doesn't say anything about ending that narrative of racial difference, that ideology of white supremacy. And because of that, I don't think slavery ended in 1865. I think it evolved. And so our modern criminal justice system is still burdened by thinking that creates a presumption of dangerousness and guilt that gets assigned to Black and brown people, and that's how people like Walter McMillan get wrongly convicted. It's how people like Herbert Richardson get the death penalty when he needs mental health care. It's how people like Anthony Ray Hinton have to spend 30 years on death row before their innocence can be embraced or accepted or recognized. And it is why the work is so important and so urgent. I am really persuaded that we're in a moment now where we're going to have to do this important narrative work. You know, we have cultural museums like the Holocaust Museum in D.C., and it's a narrative project. When you get to the end of that museum, you are motivated to say never again, but we actually haven't created spaces that motivate people to say never again when it comes to our history of racial inequality, which is partly why we're trying to do the work we're trying to do.
What I really want to know, Michael B. Jordan playing you in the movie. That's all I'm going to say.
You know, I feel so fortunate and honored, and people say, well, who's playing you? And I say, it's Michael B. Jordan. And they look at me. I said, it's the young me. Stop looking at me like that. Don't be mean. And, you know, Michael's been great. He's been fantastic to work with. We've spent a lot of time together. He's been really wonderful. He was very earnest and very committed. He was asking me all kinds of questions about what to do and blah, blah, blah. And his instincts were great. And the only thing I said, the only thing you don't need to do is when you get ready for the shoot, don't lose the Black Panther Creed body when you play me. I don't want you going on no kind of lawyer diet or anything like that. That can be the one inauthentic part of your performance. I want you to come looking just like that.
That is pure comedy. Oh my God, that is hilarious.
No, everybody has really been great to work with. Michael and Jamie Foxx and Brie Larson and Rob Morgan and Karen Kendrick and Tim Blake Nelson. They've all been terrific, really, really committed, which has been wonderful.
Well, the casting was stellar. Shout out to Carmen Cuba for that.
Yes, indeed.
So let's talk a little bit, last but definitely not least, about the EJI, Equal Justice Initiative. I know you guys not only work with people that are sentenced to death, you also deal, well, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of your clients are children that are in adult prisons, people that are being prosecuted underage, people that are dying while they're incarcerated, people that have extreme sentences for something as simple as marijuana possession. So I just want you to speak briefly about EJI and what you guys do and where people can go and donate to your cause.
Thank you. Yeah, we are really trying to end over-incarceration, mass incarceration, and excessive punishment. The United States has the highest rate of incarceration in the world. We've got 2.2 million people in our jails and prisons, 6 million people on probation. There's 70 million people with criminal arrest histories. And there are lots of communities and families and people who have been burdened by what I think of as an excessive and at times predatory criminal justice system. And so we're trying to respond to that. We are particularly focused on helping vulnerable populations. Thousands of children have been prosecuted as adults and put in adult jails and prisons at great risk of abuse and mistreatment and assault. And we're trying to end that. There are 13 states that have no minimum age for trying a child as an adult. And so we're committed to reforming that. I've represented 9 and 10-year-old kids facing 50 and 60-year prison sentences in adult prisons. And I just think that's fundamentally unfair. I actually think that all children are children, and that we don't show our commitment to children by looking at how well we treat talented kids and gifted kids and privileged kids. Our commitment to children has to be expressed by how we treat poor kids, neglected kids, abused kids. And our criminal justice system has failed in some critical respects in that way. We are trying to do something about the mandatory sentencing, extreme punishment. You know, our politicians declared a misguided war on drugs in the 1970s and 80s. They said that people with addiction and dependency problems are criminals, and we're going to use the criminal justice system to respond to that. I actually think we could have said people with addiction and dependency problems have a healthcare need, and we need our healthcare system to respond. But that choice has now created these conditions, and we're trying to address that with more responsible and appropriate sentences that give people a chance to recover, that foster rehabilitation, that help communities, recover from the challenges that we've seen. And EJI is a private nonprofit. We don't charge any of our clients money. We represent everybody for free. We rely on donations. We have started doing a lot of narrative work. We opened a museum called the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, and we now have the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which is dedicated to thousands of victims of lynching. scrutiny and racial violence. And I really do believe our nation needs an era of truth and justice, and EJI is trying to lead in that area because we're going to have to commit to talking more honestly about our history and the bias and discrimination that we still see in so many places that's evident in so many ways, I think won't be overcome until we talk more honestly about this history. So we do that work, and we issue lots of reports. We're working on curricula for schools to use to kind of engage with these issues in a more honest way. And I hope people will visit Montgomery and come and see our sites. I hope they'll go to our website, which is eji.org, and learn more about the work we're doing and about the ways in which they can get involved.
Well, wow. I have to applaud you. Like, if my hands were free, I would applaud you with both of my hands because it's mind-boggling to me that one person is making such a dramatic, enormous shift and change in this lane. I, for one, appreciate you for that. I wholeheartedly hope that the work continues. It just gets bigger and it gets stronger. I know you guys are screening at the AFI Film Festival in Los Angeles. So
Yes.
Have a good time with that. I'll be cheering for y'all from the rafters with that one. And
thank you.
Yes, of course. And I thank you so much for taking time to talk to me. I really wholeheartedly appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.